Me?
Yeah.
So my name's Ted, and feel free to stop me at any time if you guys have questions. If you want to know why I did something, how I did something. It's not really going to be a presentation. It's more going to be like a little walkthrough. So as Paul mentioned, I made a package called Pliskin. If anybody's a fan of Escape from New York and Escape from LA, yes, it is a reference to Snake Plissken. The reason I chose the name was when I was thinking up names, I noticed we all came from the grasshopper where everybody chose animals. And then Dynamo, they're not doing that. And I was like, well, what if I want to do something for grasshopper? So I went with Pliskin, which is Iroquois for snake. So Snake Plissken's name is Snake Snake. So I went with Pliskin because it sounded abstract enough. And then we were joking that because it kind of produces audits that, and we would use it to kind of find these missing things that were imported onto a sheet, and then the sheet got deleted and it's still in the file. Kind of reminded me of Escape from New York. He's got to get in, save the president's daughter, get out. So this thing gets in, finds the rogue elements, and gets out, just like Snake. Okay, so you guys probably recognize this file. It's the advanced model that comes as a sample file for Revit, and that is what we're going to be going over. I kind of set it up to work this way. So I have three main scripts that I want to show you, and I'm going to try and go over the basics here. So we'll start with the new one. The first one we're going to do is the audit. The audit's the first thing that I started scripting. Originally, when I wrote this audit, truth be told, it's based on if anybody ever worked with case and they used to give you the audits, they'd count the elements, they'd tell you.
Sorry, I don't think you're sharing your screen. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Awesome. Good catch. Okay. So if anybody ever worked with case, RIP, they got those awesome audits from them. They counted elements. They gave you a good amount. So I kind of worked on that, and I tried to add some of the same stuff that that they had, but also look for a few more element features that we found to be useful in the office. So go down to Pliskin, and a lot of them are collect. Now you notice a lot of, I think Clockwork has collect nodes. I think Lunchbox has collect nodes. A lot of them have collect nodes. And granted, you could use those as well. They all work fine. I made these specific ones just because there's a few things that that we like to include that I didn't see represented on those. So with most of the nodes, you'll notice that they all have like the booleans that they want to run on. So we'll connect this and then turn it to true. Okay, so it just collected everything. The reason that there's booleans is basically because it runs once you place it onto the workspace, but then after any changes you make to the file, if you added more CAD imports to the file, it doesn't detect those because it ran once 20 minutes ago. Not so the reason you have the boolean is to reset it basically, and that's why you're finding them on a lot of them, a lot of the different collect nodes. So grab a simple watch, and this is pretty basic. So you get the elements. We got 4 CAD link types. Get the name, DXS, DWGs. Get the ID numbers. And then this was one of the ones that I didn't see on a lot of stuff. We don't always use it in our audits. We kind of use it when the audits aren't working on a trust basis. So it's what user created the CAD import, as in who imported it in the first place. You can see there's my email address, and who last edited it. And there's my email address again. Get the workset that it's on, workset ID. Sometimes that stuff's useful. Now, that's pretty basic. one of the things I wanted to talk about was, I'm not going to go too in-depth, but as you start to learn more about the API and you're using Dynamo and you want to get to these, you want to do stuff in Python and all that good stuff, you start to learn that the way that the Revit that is kind of like the face value Revit is much, if you think that the face value Revit is confusing, the API under the hood Revit is even more confusing. So one of the big issues that we had was images getting placed in there. We would have people that, like, you know, we were making like a 6-foot banner image that was supposed to be like on display at like a huge press event type thing for the client, and people are putting that and scaling it down to a 3-inch image on a sheet, right? So like that's really bogging up the Revit file. So we were looking into, we wanted to see what are the images and what information can we get out of that. So with images, we started to do, okay, well, what's the height, and what are the dimensions as far as like I think height is actual pixels. No, height is the height with, those are the height and width pixels, and then the dimensions, I just take those two and I kind of put the X between them, you know, so much by so much, so that you can actually read them. But then there's also something called an image type. So the image type, wait, this is stupid, but like the image type is the actual image that gets imported. The instance is how many instances you have of it. When you're looking at it from, you know, the sheet, it all looks the same. They have slightly different uses. I think in my audit, I mostly just use the image instances. So we can take all these different collects, and I've got a whole file at the end that's already, I'm not going to make the spaghetti in front of you, but I'm just going to show you the basics. So you would just kind of take all of these and you would do a list dot create, and over here just say we want the images, the element. No, we're not going to return the elements. We don't want the elements because we're going to export this to an Excel file. We don't want to actually try to export elements. We want to export the name. We want to export the ID, who created it, and what are the overall dimensions. And let's throw the owner view on there too.
Is that the view that it's inserted in?
Yes. And the next thing we would do is we're going to want Excel. Well, write to file. It wants the start row. So this is the basic Excel output. How many people that output something from Dynamo to Excel? Do you guys generally use the basic Excel output, or do you use Bumblebee? Have you ever? Yeah. So I first wrote this with the basic Excel, and I'm currently in the process of converting it to Bumblebee. Just because, if you guys have used Bumblebee, it's written by Conrad Sobin, and it's got a lot of features that are really nice, like the ability to write Excel formulas, the ability to turn certain cells a color, like formatting fonts, bold, and makes it look nicer. Also, the end goal would start to be something like, as Paul mentioned, what is the sheet view, the sheet that it's on. You could start to run an audit for, hey, if this element is not found on a sheet, why don't you turn that cell red? So you could start to do checks like that. So the start row and the start column, 0, 0, data, and then file path. Yep. So the file path, for anyone that hasn't made a file out of Dynamo, you actually, it opens up like it wants you to open it, and then we're going to go to the desktop. We're going to call it the test audit, and just for safety's sake, I'm going to put an underscore instead of a space. And this is one of the annoying things, because a lot of times, you'll be troubleshooting and you'll try to figure out why is the Excel file not coming out. It doesn't know that you're exporting an Excel file. You have to tell it, so you have to call it test audit XSXL. Is that right? XLSX. Right?
No, just XL. Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
No, with no X. No X, I don't think at the end. XL.
There's definitely two.
Yeah, there's.
I think one's an older version, yeah, and one's the new version. So we'll put the file path in there. Plug that in. Sheet name. I'm going to call it sheet 1. Just want the string. For those who are not familiar, a string is just text as far as computer code is, human text as far as computer code is concerned. All right, overwrite, and then it wants to know whether or not we should overwrite an existing file. So I'll just pull up a Boolean. Set it to true. Look at that, before we even got it right, it came out done. So we're getting the names, the IDs, who created it. But generally, we would want this stuff kind of as columns and not rows. So we would take this list and we would do transpose. And that flips the matrix. We'll pump that first. We'll set it to true. That data in there. There we go. So that's a little more useful. Excuse me. So does anybody have any questions for just the basic of this? Because I'm about to pull out the steroid version.
Can either of the collectors grab size, overall size? Especially for images, like in megabytes?
So that's something that I've been working on. That I would call myself a scripter, but I'm not a coder or like a developer. So that would actually involve more knowledge of how to write Python within the Windows environment, which I'm trying to figure out. I agree that that is something that really needs to be put in there, and I'd like to get to it. Same for families, same for all that stuff. So unfortunately, no.
Okay.
But it is possible, yes. Okay, so that's the basic. No, we don't want to save that. And then here's the full version, and I'll make sure that cleaned up version, all the cleaned up versions of these scripts get out to Paul to go up on the site. Within a week, I think I should have it. So this is how I like to deploy it. I'll probably remove this portion just when I send it over there, but since this is, when I send this out within our office, I always put up here, this definition was written by Ted Hogan. If you have questions or issues running the definition, contact him. It doesn't make sense to contact the guy that gave it to you if the guy that gave it to you doesn't understand how it works. That's why you don't go to your car dealer you could go to the dealership to get it fixed, but the guy that sold you the car isn't fixing it, the mechanic's fixing it. So then what I do is I kind of break it into steps. I'll have file save, I explain this is how you got to save it. I'm going to change this again. We're going to call it the final audit, and I'll underscore again. Rips.xlsx. Now, if you notice down here, I've set it to manual run. That's because this is a lot more intense, and you don't want it to run every time you're making a change. When I start to get to a certain point, I would make that switch over to manual. If I had to troubleshoot something, let's say, let's look at the whole thing. Here's all the different categories that I'm going to pull out. Creating the list, we have 12 different items. If, for example, I needed to troubleshoot just one of those, what I would do is just kind of surpass the list that I was creating and I'd link it directly so that only that one's getting thrown out there. A lot of times when I see stuff online, I see a lot of stuff that's like, and do this, and I think to myself, like, well, yeah, that works for the small firm down the street that's maybe making, you know, some residential stuff, or a reasonable sized building, but you know, some of our stuff, it has things like tallest and largest in the you know, it's credentials. So we'll have like 10,000 of these elements, and you don't want 12,000 things all to be constantly updating in the automatic version. So I'll switch to the manual version, and I'll only turn on automatic if I'm kind of trying to troubleshoot something or work something out. Okay, so going back up here, you choose a starting row, choose a starting column. Do you want to overwrite it? And I'm just giving instructions for all of these because, you know what, someone's going to ask. I put the sheet names down there so that people know. So that originally when I first showed you the example, I was calling it sheet 1. Now I got model groups, detail groups, line styles, line patterns, fill patterns, materials, dimension styles, CAD links, Revit links, CAD imports, different than CAD links, sheets and views, and what's this last one? Image instances. Okay. So each one then has its own group. I have different, properties and parameters that are pulled from each element for each collector. These are the ones that we find useful. If you guys are using this and you think to yourself, hey, this would be a great idea, contact me on the message boards for the group. I'd be happy to try and add it out there and push it. And you know, I always want feedback on this stuff. It's mostly been internal and it's been pretty good, but I'd like to hear how other people are using it too. Over here, I transpose the list, and then I do a list add item to front, and using a code block, which I know Paul's a huge fan of. I basically just put the titles of each thing that I'm calling out so that the person reading the Excel sheet can actually understand it. So we have all this stuff. Compile all that to a list. All the sheet names are then put into a list. They're both transposed, and they're both thrown out there. So if we click Run, cool. All right. So again, this is useful. It's not necessarily the most beautiful thing. But hey, look, we got all these groups. We got the different group names. They're individual ID numbers. So we got about 9 unique items. We got the work set that they're on, detail groups, line styles.
Is this like an inventory of everything, or this is stuff that's not on sheets? Like, what is it?
This is everything that's in the file. Okay. It looks through the entire document. So that's part of that's part of the reason that I've done it. I think in the past we've had issues. We like to use Ideate Explorer, which I'm guessing a lot of people have probably had some experience with. And Ideate's really great. But what I had noticed was that sometimes we would get CAD files that they'd be put into a sheet, and that sheet gets deleted, but the CAD file wasn't deleted. So it's still in the document, but and I'm guessing here that the way that Ideate's written, it is designed to look through all the sheets. That's my guess. I don't know. But basically, it wasn't finding these files that still existed, and we knew that they would exist. We knew that they were existing because we'd have some like telltale signs, like we knew that there was a strange CAD file in there because we had strange line types that shouldn't be in our line styles, and so on and so forth. And what I noticed was in writing this, this started to find the other stuff because I would write it to look through the document. I didn't know that purposefully the way that I did it, but it was useful. So you're going to notice one of these things. If you look at this, we're in line styles right now. It's got area boundary. Area boundaries got the, I don't know what these are called, the greater than and less than. It's got those brackets around it. Look at its ID. It's negative 20,079 or something like that. If nobody's ever seen a negative ID number, that's because this is that's the ID number of something that's built into Revit. You cannot get rid of it. So built-in have ID numbers that tend to be negative, and they tend to be like 3-digit ID numbers, like 112 is the ID. That's why you're always seeing your ID number to be, it's basically ID numbers are created in the order in which they're created, and it never goes back. It never reuses an ID number. So if you import a CAD file, once, delete it, import it again, and you do that 20,000 times, you will have 20,000 different ID numbers. Actually, you probably have more because I'll get into that later. So line patterns, fill patterns. This stuff looks pretty good. Materials, dimensions, CAD links, Revit links, CAD imports. I don't know what happened to these. They must have gotten undone. I had examples. And then sheets, views, image instances, and then sheet 1 because that was there in the first place. So that's not that bad. So before I move on to the Bumblebee idea, or aspect of me trying to put this into Bumblebee, does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts, criticisms?
How do you parse that? Like when you have the Excel file that has 100,000 entries in there, do you now have something on the back end that's looking for certain things that you found or prompted?
So that starts, I'm trying to automate that through, with the use of Bumblebee, okay. Which starts to get a little even more complex, and I can show you that. In general, we try to be very strict. For us, the first thing is it a manageable number? If it's not a manageable number, you know, like then it's not worth parsing. It's worth just starting to slash out all the unuseful stuff. Or we would basically say, hey, let's not look at that today. Let's look at this today. The other thing that I am working on putting in there, and this is just a matter of me not having put it in there, not that it's a hard thing to do, is to basically tally up those numbers so that we can have an idea of like, okay, at this scale, this is the expected number that we should be seeing. So Case used to do that with their audits, and that's one of the reasons that we really like that, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to kind of recreate this to get that back.
You know, there's some sort of a third party that the case apps went into open source.
Yeah.
You know about that? Yeah. Okay.
But they did. I believe the case apps were mostly their apps, but their audits were more of their proprietary stuff.
Okay.
So I don't
know if the audits went into.
They could be, may not be.
Like so many things, I started to download it at one point, and then other projects got nowhere.
Yeah, I've slowly learned over time that, and this is purely just me being me because I wrote it, that I am able to work faster with this because I wrote it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true for all of you. Hopefully it is.
Have you done any data mining on those Excels to understand better the projects of the firm?
So yeah, there's not too much data mining right now. So one of the things that right now the names were the biggest things, right? The biggest data mining to me would be I'd like to get the file size, as he had mentioned. I'd like to use that to data mine. You know, if it's over a certain size, then highlight it. I'd like to look at the number of families, the number of instances in families, and that's something I'm trying to do with Bumblebee. I'm just going to open that up for the time being so that we got that to talk about.
Because I believe that was one of the things that Case was doing, right? He was investigating how many partitions there were, so whatever.
Yeah, so we have the example, like we still have all of our old audits that you know, based on the projects, I kind of look at those sometimes for general ballparks. And the answer, like, to be honest, no, I don't have the data yet to say completely confidently that, hey, for a 200-meter tower, this is an unacceptable number of adaptive components. So let's see where I put this. There we go. So there was a little bit of a learning curve for me using Bumblebee. I don't know if anybody else that used it had found the same thing. It was, I've always found that in going onto the API forums, the Dynamo forums, there's some really smart people there that I have to work really hard to figure out what the stuff that, they've gotten so accustomed to certain things. What's normal and second nature to them is not normal and second nature to us. And I'd say I'm more advanced than the average user. It's not second nature to me either. So
Yeah, knowing how to ask the question.
yeah, they're on like God tier level.
Yeah.
And to mention Charlie from Flex, he had come into our office and we had this discussion, and we'd both talked about how we had been on forums where it's like, somebody gives you like this riddle, literally a riddle of an answer. Here's a blog post I did 4 years ago. See if you can figure out your answer from the thing that I did, and you'd reply to them like, the API calls that you make are deprecated in the new version, and then they're like, oh, I didn't realize that. Here's the answer. I was like, just give me the answer in the first place. Okay, so So with Bumblebee, this was by Conrad Sobin, as I had mentioned. It's really great. I think it's really cool, but there is a bit of a learning curve. Instead of going from 0, 0, it wants A1. And then we're going to put that as the origin. We put that as the origin. We have to repeat that a number of times for the number of lists that we're doing. And we want to run it. And what's the file path? So let's set that file path.
What does Bumblebee do?
It's like a more advanced Excel exporter. So it's specifically for exporting Excel. I'm sorry. Should have made that more clear. So let's call this Final Audit 2. So Bumblebee, we'll run it. What's this one going to? By column false. So we'll set this to true. This one I do have set to automatic. I have it set to automatic because if you look at how he built his, do you want to run it true or false? You're controlling that with the Boolean toggle. So you're basically giving it your own manual switch built into it. And sometimes I'll do similar stuff. It kind of depends on how this works. And I'll explain in 2 seconds why I want to do that. So I ran it. Did it. Okay, good. So it was a success. So it should be down there. See, Final Audit 2. So if you notice one of the big differences is that it didn't open Excel. Otherwise, though, the data looks relatively the same. There's no sheet 1 anymore. Fill patterns, we still have all this stuff. So the next thing, so far, right now, Bumblebee is basically exporting the Excel the same way that it normally would. And what we want to do, and this is the reason that we have it set as automatic, is the next one is we actually reread that file, and then it will then highlight and basically do that rudimentary data mining. So we'll select the file again. This is the rereading. So what I am going to do is I am looking for, over here, using Bumblebee, I didn't write this, I'm going to tell it, give it a fill style, make that fill style the color red, pump that into the graphic style. Here's the text style. I want it to be bold if it detects this to be true. And then if this is equal to, if these values are coming from over here, and I'm going to say I want item 0. So I'm looking for the unique items. I pulled the unique items out of the model groups. Who created the model groups? In this case, in this particular file, I'm the only person that's created the model groups. I pull out the unique items because a lot of times with the way that the Python is written is it's going to compare the value. If the value of the item is equal to the value of what you're putting into it. Now, most of these values will be strings. So you could use a string, you could do a code block, and this is an excellent example of Paul hating code blocks. you could do this, and maybe it would work. We can even test if it would work. But a lot of times, even though it's human readable, it's actually a parameter value and not like the text. It's not text itself. So whenever I want to do this, I'm actually pulling out unique items, and then I call out the unique item that I want with the get item at index. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for model groups that are created by my email address, and then highlight those red. And then we'll go over here. We'll hit true. And did we get a success over here? So we got a success. Cool. See if it worked. No, it didn't. And this is another reason that I'm weary, or not weary, but I'm still trying to figure out Bumblebee. Had it working this morning. Let's see if we can try it again. Nope. All right, well, I'll have that fixed before it goes up.
Is there a similar overwrite existing spreadsheet value in his node, like the out-of-the-box node?
Good call. Cell range. Actually, you know what? Let's see why. So let's give it. You know, it could be the cell range. I wrote this little Python script that would kind of calculate. Oh yeah, that's definitely wrong. A1 to E4. Do I transpose this? So I wrote this little Python script that would, I was trying to figure out, I don't want to always calculate. So when you're using Bumblebee, when you're using Bumblebee, it wants to know what's the cell range that it's checking to turn things red and whatnot. But it wants that cell range in Excel terms, so A1 to E4. If we go over to this file audit, we can see here that it's A1 to E83. And I'm guessing that that has some aspect to why it's not working. I'm not sure why it's not counting. This is not, as you can see, it's in the Python script version. This is not part of Pliskin. It's not anything that I would publish because it's pretty floppy. But it would get it out there. So actually, for the sake of time, I don't want to troubleshoot this because it's the Bumblebee, because I didn't do Bumblebee and I'm not still working on the learning curve for that one. So I'd like to move on, if that's all right with you guys. So the next one that we do is organizing elements to worksets. And I'm not going to build this one from scratch because of time also. So what we find is sometimes you get an intern and that intern doesn't quite get worksets and they've been working on, they've done a bunch of stuff and it's on the wrong workset. So, you know, how do you fix that? That's a big pain in the butt and you don't even know what workset an element's on until you look at the element. So actually what I kind of came up with was this idea. So here's my README. It's designed, it's not recommended that you run all of these at the same time. I would probably run them all in batches. So here's another version of how I'm controlling the manual run versus Booleans. I have both in this case. So in this case, all the Booleans are set to false, and I have it set to manual. And what I might do is I know the project, so I know, okay, there's not that many ceilings. I'm going to set that one to true. And the curtain panels, yeah, that'll be true. And I'm going to run it for this column because I know that that's a good number. I don't want to throw 100,000 items at it one time. I want to throw 10,000 items at it 10 times. That's a nice trade-off between you and the processing power of Dynamo, basically. So what I do is, so with this script, what I was doing, I asked whether or not you want to run it. Ooh, this is pretty old. This is before I learned about Boolean gates. So this was an old thing that I would do. If you'd run it, No, this is accurate. I'm sorry. If it's true, it lets get workset ID by name, and we're going to get all of the. So what we want is the interiors workset. I've labeled them all out already. That's going to give us the workset ID. If we set this to true, the workset ID goes through. If it's false, it's null. If this node is receiving null, it doesn't run. So in that way, I've kind of created this like little gate. So I created walls to workset. In this case, this node is sending all walls to a workset, and it's telling me what succeeded and what failed and what remained unchanged. So succeeded means that they successfully went. If they failed, the general reason that the item fails is because the item is inside of a group and you cannot edit the group without exploding the group. If it's unchanged, it was already on that workset to begin with. So you would run it and you would just kind of watch. You can start to run this a little more selectively. So in this case, I'm looking for openings, but I have two different types of openings in my project. I have shaft openings and I have rectangular wall openings. Rectangular wall openings would go to the interiors workset, but shaft openings would go to the structure workset. So I'm looking for information that's already in the element itself. I know that the family type that I want to pull from this is opening. So I'm getting the element type opening, get all elements of type, and I get all opening types. How do I tell those two apart? So I would look for, I wrote a little code block. I said, get the parameter value by name. I pull out the parameter category. Does the category contain the word shaft? If it contains the word shaft in it, then I know that it's a shaft opening. If it doesn't contain it, then I know that it's a wall opening. And this is something that I know because this isn't always going to be the case with all openings, but because I know the project, I can create that stuff. So I'm using the BIM information that's in the elements already to leverage how quickly we can get this done. We do the same thing with wall types. If we know the wall type's thickness, then we could, or if the wall type had its fire rating put into it, we can start to use those pieces of information to say, is this an interior wall? Is this a structural wall? If it's structural, send it to the structure workset. If it's interior, send it to the interiors workset. If it's a curtain wall, send it to the curtain wall workset or curtain panel workset. So we're creating this Boolean filter that then sends the two groups of elements to the to each workset. So in this case, previously I showed you the all walls to a specific workset. I'm also showing you the all or given elements to a workset. So I created a few basic ones like walls, floors, and other stuff that you can just kind of click it and go boom, and it goes to that workset. But a lot of times we want to be a little more precise, like a surgeon. So we're going to collect the elements and kind of sort them the way that we want. And now the shaft openings are going to structure, and the interior openings are going to, the wall openings are going to interiors. One thing to note with this script, which is fairly ready to go, is that every time Dynamo updates, every time Revit updates, some of these things go orange like this. This was originally set to something, as was the reveals. If we go to categories, reveals I don't believe are an option for a category anymore in Dynamo. So keep an eye out for that stuff. It's definitely one of the more annoying things. But at the same time, I take that as not a red flag, but as an opportunity to be like, okay, well, who changed it? Did Dynamo change it? Did Revit change how they're classifying reveals? If so, why? How? What does that mean for us? Tell me about the reveals. So if I were, let's say that I had a reveal in the project, and I wanted to know, okay, well, what's it considered now? That's when I would go to this plugin, Revit Lookup. Has anybody ever used this? It's like the most amazing thing if you ever want to work with the API. And look up. So I think Jeremy Tamick rates it. Revit lookup. If you Google it, Jeremy Tamix, here's the GitHub. If you're like me and you don't know what to do with that, I kind of know what to do with that. I go down, I think, to the next one, which is this blog that already, nope, that's his blog. Nope, that's Building Coder again, I'm sorry. I have different results on my Google. Let's see. I'm pretty sure it was from, what's Revit?
Okay. Isn't it Revit SDK? Or
Yeah, it's the SDK, but like, so I'm sorry, compiled version. Okay, here's what we're looking for. Is basically Jeremy gives you all the tools to make the plugin yourself because he wants you to learn how to do that, and that's admirable. However, it's also really, really advanced. Like not slightly advanced, it's really advanced. So the What Revit Wants blog is what I download it from. They compile it for you. You can download it, and it gives you the DLL. You just drop it in there. So this is what happens. Let's say, is this a reveal? Yeah, it's a reveal. Okay, what happened to the reveal? So we got a reveal selected. We go to Revit Lookup, and we say Snoop Current Selection. And this gives me all the Revit API information. This is actually really hard to read. I don't fully know how to read it. You know, here's the reveal category, or maybe that's the element ID. So I would say category. What's the reveals category? The name of the category is reveal. So that means if we're not seeing a reveal in the Dynamo drop down, for whatever reason, Dynamo decided reveal shouldn't be in Dynamo. The people that did it. Maybe it's a built-in category OST reveals. Sometimes they have built-in categories that are different than the regular categories. Sometimes you can find stuff by that. It's really great though too because if you use element.parameters and watch node in Dynamo, you're going to get the parameters that come. These are the face value parameters of an object. If you use Revit Lookup, you can see all the parameters, the under the hood parameters, the built-in parameters that Revit doesn't normally let you see. So this is where you're finding image resolutions and what, you know, this is kind of where you might start to find a pathway to finding not the file size, but the file path to where you could find that file size. It gets really, really weird in here, but what's really nice is offset from wall, display. You can find the display unit types. You can find out what the parameter information in there is really useful. Sometimes when you see that stuff, like I mentioned, it's OST underscore reveals. Sometimes that's the exact wording you need to actually look for in the Revit API. You need to Google that, and that's what's going to send you to the kind of Python coding that you're looking for. And that is the general, that's how we kind of keep ourselves organized. We figure out what are some of the ways we want to, what are the worksets we're going to use, and then what elements go on each workset, and how do we define, if there's an element that kind of fits onto two, how do we break that up, and how do you find that information in the BIM element? Does anybody have any questions about this one? All right.
Do you run this mostly, or do you have other people in the office?
I train someone to run it. So like what I'll do is when we have our kickoff meetings, we tend to have like a BIM lead on the team. And I tend to know, okay, maybe this person is the BIM lead, but I know that this person's really good at Dynamo, or that they've actually run Dynamo before.
They'll read it before they hit the button.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like worst case scenario, no one's going to run this, and then I find it hard to imagine that someone's going to be working for 4 hours, not sync or save, run this, and create a scenario in which, so another reason, so another reason that I do break this up is just in the unlikely event that you're collecting elements that happen to fit into 2 of these categories. I can't imagine how that would happen, but let's say Revit updates something, how they classify something, Dynamo updates something. Let's say that you got one group of elements that's falling under 2 categories, and you're telling category A to go to, you know, the structure set, and category B to go to the interior set, you know, you run the risk of it basically they're fighting over which set they're going to, and it's probably just going to take a long time and eventually settle on one of them, but you also might run into an endless loop that crashes it. Pretty cool though, because you start to learn, you can just kind of select an element and start to figure out what it is. Like plants are never something that, and I don't mean like trees. Yeah, we don't really put trees in our models. But like potted plants have like a slightly different category than like, yeah, I think it's planting versus plants or something like that. So it's really strange how weirdly specific it gets.
Playing around with revealing offending elements in the three-dimensional space in Revit.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question? So
if I'm an average user and I
yeah.
run something like this,
yeah.
instead of parsing through an Excel file to find offensive elements,
yeah.
is there a way to show them in like a temporary isolate mode in Revit?
Okay.
And then I could go element by element and fix the work set?
Possibly.
Yeah, you can,
or put them on a temporary.
You can override them in the view. And
yeah, exactly. Just
yeah.
Make them red.
More visual.
Or maybe put them on a temporary work set.
Yeah. Or maybe highlight them red color or something.
Yeah, yeah. So it looks like according to Jeremy, he's saying that you can control like hiding elements in, and I would assume that you could then also do isolate elements. So yeah, you could have something where it's feeding all the elements of a certain type into this node that then takes all of those as a group and then isolates that. So I'll try and write that before.
It would just make it so much easier
yeah.
to see like, oh, there's everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
In the 3D model.
For sure. So actually though, this is unrelated to the Excel file. This is just
I understand that.
All right. I just wanted to make sure.
A way to make it easier on your average user.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try and come up with something like that. Okay. Any other questions?
So Ted, with this one, could we put a report at the back end of this, kind of just give a summary as to what it actually did?
Yeah, I kind of do that with the succeeded, failed, and unchanged. I leave a watch node there, so that, again, that's why I wrote them in smaller batches, so I could say, okay, well, what failed? I don't personally care about what was unchanged because that means it was on it to begin with. I'm a little curious about what failed, and then I would do like, generally it would show the element, and then it would have like the element ID. Yeah, let's try and run a couple of these. Make sure that those are all set to true.
I would assume it would be preferable to run this with nobody else in the file.
Yeah, ideally.
If somebody's got it checked out.
Yeah, that's another reason that you get to fail. I can see that happening. Generally, yeah. So what tends to happen is we'll work, and then when it comes time, I keep open ears for when it's time to like right after a deadline. The week after a deadline, I always be like, all right, we got to purge everything. We got to do a cleanup. And I'll try and work with teams that way. Do you guys want to run it, or do you want to move on to the CAD one? All right, let's see what happens.
One question though too.
Yeah.
Could you speak more to the kickoff meeting? So are the teams meeting then to run the script, or someone is assigned to run the script?
Oh, okay,
and then,
yeah.
So from what Dean was also saying, if you do have a report, then is it the team's responsibility to look at the report, or is someone on the team looking at the report?
So we have a kickoff meeting to just talk about, and generally, we'll have a kickoff meeting. We'll talk about how we want to go at something with BIM, because we generally don't start in Revit. And there's the leader, and then what will happen is I have a pretty good idea of most people in the office's like skill levels, and I kind of think of it like not that I'm a manager, but that like somebody once told me, they're like, thing is, managers shouldn't be managers, they should be bartenders, because you know, a bartender is someone you go to and you tell them like, oh man, I had a really crappy day. Let me tell you about my problems. And then the bartender's like, you know, I know a guy, and he can fix your problem. So that's kind of my approach to generally handling this stuff, which is cool. So that's rad. Which is, I try to, we have weekly meetings for all the BIM projects, and I listen to the issues, and then I'll try and fix them. Now,
are there drinks?
No. And to be honest, the next Dynamo script I'm going to show you was requested by Paul, and I finished it 2 weeks after the project finished its final submission. It was a tough nut to crack, but we did eventually get it. No use to him. That's probably why he's somewhere else. But yeah, so we'll have the discussions, and then I'll talk about what are the strategies. Okay, like what are, sounds like a lot of it's just like, okay, if we're going to use a lot of adaptive components, you know, if we're doing a single curve building that has all this stuff, I see that we're probably going to use 1 or 2 adaptive components to do the curtain wall, and in that case, you know, our primary concern of what's going to get messed up is probably going to be, you know, this part of the design. And so we'll look for the problem childs in the design. What is the most likely to run into problems? And then I'll monitor those. And so when we have our first meeting, we discuss, and then once they start working in Revit, I'll sit down with the team. I'll help them with conversions. I'll be like, who's in charge of sending this data over? Who's in charge of doing the interop for this? And then I'll try to get them the best workflows. It's not always the right one, but it's kind of, it almost works in a monkey see, monkey do kind of way. And then you learn real quickly who are the people that actually want to learn and who are the people that are just going to go through the motions. Yeah, people that want to learn are better, but people that just go through the motions are just as useful as long as they go through those motions correctly and listen. So that's, and then you start to see those people, and those people, you start to make sure that those are the people that are running the weekly meetings. So I'm going to move on to the next one. This was probably the one that I was really happy to figure it out. So this is a way to kind of convert CAD to Revit. Now granted, this is down and dirty. It ain't perfect. But raise your hand if you work at a company that has a huge CAD detail library and a not so huge Revit detail library. I'll raise mine. So I don't remember the exact situation, but Paul, you were in something where you really got steamrolled.
The technical director really likes the details from one project from 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, I want this detail, this detail, this detail, this detail, this detail. Do them.
Yeah. So you know, we have been looking for how do you do CAD to Revit for a really long time, and I was coming up with these like really complex answers because like there's a few plugins that are like convert all line styles, all lines of this line style to this line style, and you're selecting one by one. And I was like, that's stupid because we had some interns in here that imported 1,000 line styles. I can't do 1,000, right? And eventually, I had this awesome epiphany. And like all new ideas, it wasn't new. It was basically just the concept of CTBs in AutoCAD, where you tell it not this line style, but that this color gets transformed to this line thickness when you print. So I came up with a way to look at the line color from AutoCAD, and if it's if it's a red line, change that line style and change it to this line style that I give you. And then the other thing is hatches. So the first thing, I'm sorry, I'm getting like, this is all jumbled. Let me start over. So the first thing we want to do with this is I need to select all the elements in the view that I want. And actually, we're in a 3D view right now, and Dynamo can be pretty view specific. So I am going to go back to Dynamo, and I'm going to close it. I'm going to open the view that I want to use, the drafting view. I'm going to reopen Dynamo, and I'm going to reopen the script. So I want to select all the model elements. Now they've been selected. I'm going to go back to Dynamo. Here we go. Now, when I click the manual button, or when I click the run button, it's going to sort all of the CAD elements, all the elements that I just selected, which we're assuming are CAD elements in this drafting view. When I put that in there, I broke it in, I have it sort them out into 4 basic categories: text notes, curves, filled regions, and other. Other would, I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to assume that I don't know every type of CAD element in the world that could happen. So I put an other in there. You can look at what's other. I really don't use it. I do nothing with the text notes. In my opinion, I'm not interested in changing it. Graphically, it probably looks how we wanted it to look in the first place. I'm not really that interested in it. Doesn't make sense to me to write a script that changes the text to the font and size and all that stuff that you want. What I'm concerned about are the curves, the filled regions. So I have the curve come down. The curve goes into this node here, which I wrote. It says line color to line style. So I give it the lines that I want, the line style I want that line color to change to. In this case, I've written a line style by name, which means that I can tell it the exact name, thin gray lines. That's the line style I'm going to change it to. And to reset all of those, I would do false and true with the Boolean if I added new ones. Okay? Then we've given it the line color to look for, which is red. Or no, in this case, it's the first one, cyan. I'm sorry. Now, I've added in Pliskin, I've got colors as well. It's all the basic AutoCAD colors and a few of the grays that we as a company use frequently. If you guys have colors that you use, I can try to add them, or you can just create your color yourself with the RGB options in Dynamo. It's really easy. Actually, you could create one in code block, but I'm not going to do that because that's stupid. Why is it double clicking every time? Okay. You could just do RGB. And then you could type in what you want those RGB values to be, and you can plug that in there. So what it does, it looks for all the colors. As I said before, we got changed, unchanged, and failed. I'm personally not interested in what changed because in this case, we're going to visually see whether or not it changed. The unchanged, in this case, the unchanged would be something that you tried to change to a line style that doesn't exist, or a color that is not the color you were looking for. So I feed that downstream. The next one, when I ask for what lines, rather than pulling from the first batch, and to avoid creating one of those endless loops, of a snake eating its own tail, I always have things go downstream from the unchanged, so that at the very, very end of all the colors, I get unchanged elements are the ones that come out unchanged from the very last one. So the next thing that happens after it changes is I have this node called get line style color, and I take the line style that I'm changing the lines to, and I say what is the color of that line style. I take that that color value, and I put that into the filled region color to color node, which I wrote. That I tell it look for a filled region starting with this color, change it to this color, so that if it's a blue filled region, it will match the blue line style that you change blue lines to. Same way that CTBs would work. I plug the filled regions in here. And I would also do the downstream here. Apparently I didn't do it. Didn't crash before, so I got lucky, or it's not something to worry about, but always good to err on the side of caution. There is one thing that is actually pretty annoying with the filled regions. Now, if you've ever had the filled regions explode from CAD, they almost always explode with a thick black line outlining them. So this is where I get into some of the dirty CAD. or dirty Python, I should say, and I can actually open that up a little bit if anyone's curious. I leave all my Python on, you know, I don't try to block it. I want you guys to, like, if you're interested in learning, I sign it, Ted. That's my design name. I sound more like a designer if it's Ted instead of Ted. So I sign all my Python Ted. So you can look at this here. So I actually do one of the most dangerous things in doing working with the Revit API in this one, and that's starting a transaction. And anytime you do a transaction, that's when you make an actual change to the Revit document, and that's where you're the most vulnerable to something crashing. Generally, anytime your Revit is spinning and spinning and spinning, it's in the middle of doing a transaction. So what I basically do is, earlier when I said that, you know, if we had a filled region here, oh, this is selected. No, it's not. Okay. If we have a filled region, and I was, you know, I made that comment like, you know, if you imported and exported the CAD 20,000 times, you'll have 20,000 different layers or ID numbers. And then I was like, oh, you know what, that's technically not true because X, Y, Z. And I said I'd explain it later. If we snoop this, snoop the current selection, you get an element ID of 30,000, 38,000, blah, 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 blah. Okay, the Revit API does not expose how to access the edge curves of the of a filled region. You would have to double click it. You have to manually go in here and change it. But if you look at those edge curves element IDs, they're created immediately before the filled region is. First, it makes the edges, then it wraps the filled region around it. So I had found someone doing something. Someone had written on the API forums. It was a really bad solution, and then they wrote this solution, or they were discussing the possibility of this solution, where they said, well, why don't you take the element ID of the filled region, subtract a number like 5,000. You're rarely ever going to have a filled region with 5,000 edge pieces or more, and then basically look for every line that fit the line type of, so once you select the lines, you can then say, what's your line type? It says, oh, I'm a filled region borderline, basically, and then grab those, put those here. Then so it gets real convoluted. You can start to see how, like, it's not likely that you're going to crash it, but it doesn't take much to gum up the works in a kind of situation like that if something were to go wrong. So that's kind of one of the ways that I wrote around it, and I kind of took the suggestion of this and that bad suggestion, and I merged them together to make something that was slightly more stable. But I haven't actually crashed it yet using this. So the first thing I do then is I take all filled regions from this organizing, and then I change I run it through this node, filled region border change, and I use the invisible line style. Invisible line style, I made this node. It grabs graphic styles. It looks for the specific one that is invisible lines. That tends to be an ID that's negative number. It's difficult. So far, it hasn't changed from Revit version to Revit version, but I do expect at some point it's not unlikely that that would break. If you guys ever notice that it breaks in a different version, let me know. I'll put in a new node. We can start noting them, naming them by the version that it's the invisible line style for. Okay, so then we take that. They've all had their filled regions change, and then we run it through this. So let's run this.
Did you have to explode those CAD files for this to work?
Yep.
Do you do it in a container?
I would do it in a container file. I would highly recommend that. I don't in this example for the sake of presentation. Yeah. So I lied. It did change the filled region. One of the things that also sucks, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but if you explode an DXF file, I got these from the AIA website. If you explode a DXF file, most of the hatches explode into lines. But if you just take that DXF and you change it resave it in AutoCAD as DWG, the hatches will explode as filled regions. So I added a filled region in here just to prove that my node works, but I did lie about the green. I specifically wrote it wrong so that you would see that it does continue to write downstream. And then I can show you this. What's nice is, let's say you, oh crap, I put the wrong thing down. Undo. Everything undoes as one single Dynamo action. So it's really nice to troubleshoot this way. And then I color-coded this to just, I grouped the things with color so that I know this one that looks green, that's probably green. So it's medium thin lines, plural. Hit run. There we go. So that's been done. And then I could go to another one. Is this one exploded? Yeah. So we know that that's right. We know that these follow the same CTP stuff. Change. Select that. Okay, run. It takes like 30, 40 seconds each one, depending on how complex it is. Hopefully Dynamo hasn't changed it where changing these views isn't affect it too much.
Have you tried these on Dynamo Player yet?
No, is that new one where it does, okay.
The push button and execution? Yeah.
Yeah, I've thought about doing some of that stuff. Does that allow you to put any kind of variables into it?
Yeah, actually it just reads the background.
But can you change it from Dynamo Player variables?
You could do. You could do something that pops a window out and then
Oh yeah?
adds a different parameter. Say.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, then I'm pretty excited to do that then.
17.
Yeah. So see, like in 40 seconds, I did this entire sheet. Is it the cleanest? Is it building information modeling? No. Is it better than CAD being just put into your file? Yeah, I think so. Some of it, when you do get into the hatches, actually it's not terrible because you can start to drag some of these things, and some of it is somewhat intelligent. It's a good job for an intern. Just go through the library. Does anybody have any questions about this or ideas on other applications like the Dynamo Player? I'm all ears. Because I got the all right. Cool. All right then. I'll have all these cleaned up and available. Thanks for listening to me. Hopefully it wasn't too boring.
Oh, perfect. Cool. Great. Pliskin's going to save me.
Good. And I'll, I'm happy to answer stuff on the message boards. Oh, one thing, if you guys ever decide to publish your own package, I made the mistake of thinking Autodesk had stuff together. They have all those different Autodesk profiles, which you would think if you put your information for the profile, it would cross-platform. It doesn't. So whatever name you publish it under first is what you're stuck with. So if you guys could not email my Gmail account, it's an emergency, I understand, but you're going to have to make it worth my while. Yeah. And make sure that you have your profile, fixed before you can't change it afterwards. Just ask them.
I mean, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I don't understand why.
Well, it's a high priority for them to fix it, that's all.
Yeah, exactly.
So this uses a different login profile than the other Autodesk?
Yeah, and on top of that, I have, well, it's not joined together, but on top of that, I have my Revit profile all written out. And now we're just getting into complaining, so I'm going to stop recording.